England have the Calcutta Cup back. Wales have life, I think, and France were just mean on Sunday against Italy.
Most England fans would take an ugly win over a pretty loss, I think.
If he's the starting fly half in an Ireland Grand Slam, he's the Lions.
It felt like at one point the more fans booed the kicking, the more effective it was.
Really, I think it's the opposite. I think he's nailed that moment. It's a definite Stonewall penalty, and I think he was budget for the rest of the game.
They looked menacing and they looked pissed off.
You don't like saying it in the Six Nations, but it was virtually men against boys, wasn't it?
Go.compare sponsors the Telegraph Rugby podcast. Every rugby player knows they need the support of their team to get the best results, and it's the same with insurance. When you are looking for great deals on your insurance, you can find the perfect support in Go.compare, helping compare the right deals for you. Feel the deal with Go.compare.
Hello everybody, welcome back to the latest episode of the Telegraph Rugby podcast. Another weekend of the Six Nations is in the books. England have the Calcutta Cup back. Wales have life, I think, and France were just mean on Sunday against Italy. It was like bullying. It was awful to watch. I'm Ben Coles, Telegraph Rugby reporter. I've got Charlie Morgan with me. Hi, Charlie.
Hello, Colesy.
I've got Charles Richardson with me. Hi, Charles.
Hello.
Let's get straight into your highlights of the weekend, because I know where you were. We were all at Twickenham and we were all kind of dotted along a line.
You know what we did last weekend.
I do. Yeah, I saw you working hard, Charles. Straight into highlights of the weekend, I think. Charlie, what did you like from the third round of the Six Nations?
Well, I like loads of things, but I'm going to go with the Friday night Rodney Parade, Wales under 20, dogging out the most dogged of wins over Ireland under 20. They won 20 points to 12 and just tackled themselves to a standstill.
What was the tackle count? I saw something mad.
I think they had something like the top 12 tacklers in the game, led by Harry Beddle, who got 34, I want to say.
Wow.
Which was about 8 or 9 more than anybody else in the game. Just remarkable, and just actually maybe set a tone of optimism. There was a lot of sort of on social media sort of surfing that a little bit afterwards. A lot of people sort of going, a little bit of life in Welsh rugby then. So that rolled into.
Do you think the seniors touched on it Saturday morning? Do you think they'd have gone, look what they've done?
I don't know, but it certainly the theme certainly carried on, you could say.
If you're getting to 34 tackles, then you're in like the Deuce Etoile kind of.
I was about to say that, the next Deuce Etoile,
aren't you? Which is
Berger
never kind of bad company to be in there. So that is very impressive. Charles, what about you?
Well, it's got to be Ollie Lawrence's offload at the end of the first half at Twickenham, which, have they found the ball yet, Rosed? I will say that obviously I'm being flippant, and apologies to Ollie. I think you've been excellent in the Six Nations. That was just a very amusing moment in the game, I felt. Great line break. I think Marcus Smith has gone the wrong way. I think he's got to go inside. I think he's got Ben Curry there. And then it comes back to Ollie Lawrence, who earlier in the move has thrown a worldie of an offload to Marcus Smith, and then flings what can only be described as a very ill-judged pass at the end of the first half that basically had everybody with their head in their hands, I think, around Twickenham, and there was just a collective groan. He was not on his own, because later in the game Ewan Ashman equally threw what was equally as despicable an offload. Straight into touch.
Offload. I mean, some excellent caveats in there from you. So
yeah. Obviously, I'm being flippant, because I do think that Ollie Lawrence. We'll come on to it later, but I do think that Ollie Lawrence is playing really well at the minute. So
Ollie Slatham's reaction is excellent, because he's worked his way all the way round from the left wing, and he is in position to receive it. And the pass from Mitchell is actually pushes Lawrence flatter, doesn't he? But so he fixes in those players. So it's absolutely the right option. But yeah, just went miles.
Devon Toner would have had no chance.
Was that the moment in the game where I turned to you and you just looked absolutely aghast at something? I mean, that could have been many moments on Saturday, but there was certainly a point where you looked very upset by something that England had done, and I can't quite remember if it was that or whether it was.
Yeah, there were a few moments, and Scotland. It was just a frustrating game all round. I think it was it was very niggly, wasn't it? And I don't think the referee contributed. We'll come on to that. I don't think the referee necessarily contributed to that, but and it was an ugly match and an ugly win for England. But you'll take them.
I think Charlie might be a bit more positive when we get onto that. Just my highlight to round off would be the pre-match on Sunday and the nice tribute for Sergio Parisse that they had in Rome, because obviously he never really got to kind of have a
was that the rationale for it?
Yeah. So he never
he
was going to have that New Zealand farewell test, wasn't he? And then that got binned because of COVID, and then he was going to have
Well, originally, it was the Typhoon
Oh,
Hagibis
sorry,
in the World
it was
Cup.
the Typhoon,
Yeah.
wasn't it? Oh, yeah, sorry, that was it. It was the Typhoon game, and then he was going to have the Six Nations in 2020, and there was COVID, and essentially, and then he just didn't get picked, and so he never really had the chance to say farewell, did he? Even though he only retired for too long, like a couple of years ago.
Was it Martin Williams who had a Barbarians game made into a capped game so he could have 100 caps?
If it was him, he would deserve it, because
Yes.
that would be a fitting tribute. And so this was essentially what Parisa came out with his kids, delivered the match ball. It was amazing reaction, standing ovation, crowd kind of loving him, and rightly so, because he is by far and away, from my memory, the best Italian forward we've seen, and just a lovely touch, I thought.
A lovely touch. And can we give a special mention among the Italian doom and gloom for the no-look pass from Juan Ignacio Brex?
Oh, I mean, there was loads to like about how Italy played in the first half hour, and then then it all went a
There's
bit.
loads to not like.
It all went a bit
Yeah,
south.
rubbish.
Before we dive deep into what England did to win back the Calcutta Cup, can we just touch on the kind of mixed reaction to their win on Saturday, Charlie? Because some fans happy to just get a win, some people a bit less impressed with how they attacked. Summarise that for me, if you will.
Of course, that was sort of the thrust of my live piece from the game was going in on the boos. I think it's around the 48th minute when Alex Mitchell lifts a box kick. Having been around the sort of between end of the first quarter, between about 15 minutes, about 35 minutes in the first half, there were just a lot of box kicks, and England weren't getting a lot of pay out of that tactic because Carl Rowe was excellent, and so was Kinghorn, and the kicks weren't actually.
I was going to say a lot of the kicking was poor, wasn't it?
Yeah, some of it was, some of it wasn't.
Kilter, you'd say.
If you watch it back, I've seen a lot of
Scottish go.
Well, yeah, no, it wasn't, but it does work.
a lot of the commentary I've seen has been England kicked to Scotland and gave up kick return opportunities. That's not true. There was one kick when they've gone across the 22 and Marcus Smith has kicked. The Kinghorn fields it, and the chase pinces in on Kinghorn, who feeds Van der Merwe and puts Van der Merwe down the left. That's an opportunity from kick return, but the rest of it didn't give up field position, and it was just the fact that Scotland were winning those scraps, winning the kicking battle, therefore winning territory, and actually they were also riding a few penalties that England conceded, both in possession at the breakdown and at the line-out, a couple of quite silly concessions from England then, and that was what was contributing to England just not being able to touch the ball. The first Scotland try comes from a kick return, but it's actually Finn Smith in the backfield trying to find a bit of space, and Ollie Slightholme kicking it, and even then Scotland go 3 or 4 phases across the sort of middle of the field, which England just don't do because they are not as comfortable on the ball as other sides. They don't have the athleticism necessarily from sort of 13, 14, 15 in their side that a team like Scotland do. And I can't remember what the question was.
It was more just the reaction to it. The funniest thing for me was that it felt like at one point, the more fans booed the kicking, the more effective it was.
Well,
there were a couple back to back where then kind of England sort of like scrappily did win the ball back, like near the Scotland.
So famous Twickenham boo cheer.
So yeah. I think the frustration came from the fact that in the first half they were kicking for Ollie Slightholme to chase, which is a totally different thing to kicking for Tommy Freeman to face, because Tommy Freeman is outstanding in the air, and he's actually outstanding at making up the ground and then making a decision and then latching onto a player, making a really kind of positive tackle. So that the big boo cheer in the 48th, I think, minute, around there, started off as a boo, became a cheer because Tommy Freeman lassoed Van der Merwe, threw him back over the Scotland 22. Scotland were sort of caged into their 22, had to scramble into touch. And when England lose possession, it's when they launch Ellis Genge off the next line out and Jamie Ritchie's over the ball. So that's in the microcosm, is the kicking battle was England were getting control of the kicking battle and other areas were letting them down. And I'm absolutely in no way disputing that it was a fairly ugly performance, and a lot of the time they seem to take one step forward, one step back with this performance, if you know what I mean, with one area of their game going well and another area sort of letting them down. However, I think when you're playing a team, regardless of whether you're at home, regardless of where you're 9-point favourites, which we thought was quite curious to start with anyway, you do whatever it takes. You do whatever it takes to get over the line against Scotland. And you, as Steve Borthwick was sort of at pains to point out afterwards, you've got to realise that Scotland are going to take away areas of your game and make life awkward because they've got very good players. And the last point I want to make on this is when Tom Curry and Ben Earl were up for media at the start of this week, I left their sort of session going, geez, England might win by 25 points there, because they seemed just so clued in. I wonder whether they built up the week a little bit too early, and they had the 2-week build up, didn't they? And they were talking about how they'd been shown clips of how badly they had played against Scotland in the past. I wonder whether they were almost a little bit punched out emotionally in that first half, and because they did look a little bit flat compared to Scotland, and Scotland were actually able to play on that neurosis that England just do have against Scotland, and they had to get through that however they did it, and they did it by riding their luck. But geez, they have had laughably little luck in the run previous to this game. So long story short, I'm higher on it than a lot of other people.
What a setup for our deep dive coming up. We're
going to go deeper.
We'll have a quick pause, and then we'll break down the game in even greater detail. Okay, so it's the first win in 5 attempts for England over Scotland. I think I enjoyed how hard all the players went on their social media photos afterwards with the cup, because you could tell it actually did mean a lot. I think it was Jamie George drinking out of it. He just had the caption that said delicious. Like, he clearly really enjoyed Scottish tears, Charles, didn't he? Because it hasn't happened a lot. I mean,
no.
If we touched on the booze, Charles, talk to me about how important this win is in terms of just winning at any kind of cost, because we were so critical of them for losing so many games.
Well, precisely. I think that is at the heart of this, and to sort of take go slightly macro from what Charlie was saying just previously, England have been correctly and rightly and fairly criticised for playing pretty rugby last year, certainly at the back end of the Six Nations and on the New Zealand tour, and not winning matches. And people were getting frustrated that they weren't winning. And now, they were criticised for losing. They were criticised for losing the end of the Australia game. They were criticised for not beating New Zealand. South Africa's slightly different, because they were never really sort of looked like they were going to get there. But in the other two, certainly there was a chance. Against Ireland too, when they led at half time, criticised for losing these matches, regardless of how they're playing. So I think it's a little bit unfair for us to sit here now and criticise them for winning ugly, when last year we were sort of painting the picture that winning is all that counts. And I think that most England fans would take an ugly win over a pretty loss, I think. And that's where we're at. There are frustrations. I think the frustrations from the fans come from the fact that they think that the team is capable of playing in a more stylish fashion.
They want them to play like Scotland.
They want them to play like Scotland. I don't think they can with the current setup of the team and with the players available. I don't think they're incomparable. Finn Smith is a different player to Finn Russell. Marcus Smith is a different fullback to Blair Kinghorn. The midfield is nowhere near as fluid and as balanced as Scotland's, even with Tuipulotu, and Tom Jordan was fantastic. The best centre on the field, arguably, on Saturday.
Didn't you just look across such a basic? This is maybe a really basic point to make, but didn't you just look across at the respective backlines and go, Scotland have Hugh Jones, Blair Kinghorn, Duhan van der Merwe. Those are three big strapping athletes who would be the biggest, most strapping athletes in England's backline, maybe apart from Tommy Freeman. And they had Carl Rowe started like a train. He was
so
outstanding. So that first box kick to him is actually a good is a decent box kick. Looks like the chasers kind of crowded him out, bumps a player off, I think steps someone else on the inside, and he's away. And then they send him through a seam of a line out early on, and he nearly scores as well.
No, I was just going to say, I thought Jordan was great, but I also felt there was a weird period where England sort of figured out the width that Scotland were playing with, and then countered it, and there was a point where then Scotland really missed Tuipulotu to kind of cut through the middle, which they didn't have.
They definitely went in the second half. They definitely went. Their forwards were like, right, we've going coast to coast. England have sussed that out, and they've starting to repel us, even if they're bending a bit and rather than breaking. So let's go in and around the fringes. England repelled that too till right at the end. That really, really clever sort of disguise,
because that was it, wasn't it? It was something different. It wasn't.
Yeah, they tried it in the first half. Interesting, they tried it in the first half, and I think it's Jones that cuts the angle, and England are wise to it. But teams keep going after England around that fringe.
I can't remember. I think he gets between two replacements as well. Who are probably just on.
It's Baxter
and Hayes, or Baxter and George.
I think.
But I mean. Ben Curry was obviously excellent off the bench, but I do. But you have to look at who he's come on for. He came on for Tom Willis. He's a very different player, and I think England did lack that ball carrying oomph. I mean, we've said it so often. They did lack that. Alex Mitchell didn't have his best game and was arguably overshadowed by Ben White, although there wasn't, I don't think, tons in it. But Alex Mitchell did not have his best game. And when your 9 is not having their best game, that is immediately mitigation for your backline not functioning. And there was no real reason for Mitchell not to be having his best game because the pack were very good. He had very solid foundations. The line out, if we're going to go into positives, the line out was excellent, much better than against France. The scrum was outstanding, you would argue. In fact, it kept them in it, really, for about a good half an hour.
Yeah, Scotland trying to engage early at the start, trying to negate that power, and then eventually they got pinged.
And they got pinged off the park by the end. And the breakdown was phenomenal as well. Questionable legality, but there was questionable legality from both sides.
Which is another reason to mitigate scrum half's performance. Because watching it back, Alex Mitchell at the time felt like he was always pulling bodies out, sort of going to Pierre Brousset. There's somebody lying.
There was that one almost comical ruck where the ball didn't come out for ages, and then Mitchell just picked it up and threw it on the floor. Remember that? Live was amusing, and then watching it back, it was just like
that's happening for both sides. There's one where I think it's towards the back end of that first half, England are really holding on and having to repel sort of wave after wave. It feels like, but they do defend really well, and they just work really, really hard for each other. But it's Lawrence, I think, that on the drift makes a good tackle on Kinghorn, up to his feet to counter up with Earl, and he gets lucky, sort of falls into Ben White, and Ben White's fuming, but gets pinged for a knock on, and Ben White's absolutely raging with Brousset. But that was how the breakdown was.
No, 100%. And if the breakdown is that messy, it becomes very difficult to generate quick ball, obviously. But Scotland worked out a way of doing it and getting, width of pass, speed of pass to get on the outside of England. England never worked that out. And without the main ball carrier, Tom Willis at number 8, they were unable to generate the quick ball. They tried a couple of times with Genge off first phase, which was good to see because they should do that more often because he is one of their best ball carriers. However, it didn't work. But that was more not because of the theory of it, more because of the actual execution and practice of it. But they should be doing that more often. But it would be good to see him in the 13 channel and hitting him. Like, it would have been great to see him going at Hugh Jones rather than, okay, they wanted to isolate Russell, but off first phase of a line out, your back row is always there to cover to protect the 10.
Charlie, can you validate something for me? Did Scotland at one point launch Sander Ferguson off a line out on a crash ball?
Yeah,
because I saw that
in the 13
live
channel
and was
a bit closer.
Was it?
Because I was doing
in the midfield,
I was doing Scottish player ratings, and I had to double check. I was like, is that Sander Ferguson on a crash ball through the middle?
There's maybe something to look into how these the line out law changes are making sides go quicker and really not being bothered about lifts. The try that the first phase try that Scotland score, they get to width amazingly well because there's no lift. They just go straight into line out. It might be a 4-man, and Ben White wangs it to Finn Russell, who does exactly the same to, I think it's Kinghorn, and then they've got Rowe coming around to make the overlap, and they were always going to go after that 13 channel because that's a pinch point in any defence, but that's where the sort of pinch point is for this New England sort of drift, and it's Freeman has to stay a little bit narrow, and he does get a cross to make, but not before the pass goes. So,
I think the line out is a good microcosm of the sacrifices of team selection as well. We obviously discussed it with Steve in the press conference last week. We sort of said, look, why are you not picking a third out and out line out jumper when you always have, and you've said it's so important? And he said, well, because I think that we've got a back row who can run and be mobile and be dynamic and scavenge on the floor, who are outstanding at that. So let's prioritise that, and we'll maybe pick our best 2 line-out jumpers in the second row and sort of sacrifice the line-out a little bit, which in attack they didn't. In defence they did. They barely got off the ground to compete on the Scottish ball, which in the age of it, the throw is only going to be called not straight if you compete, I think is a little bit foolish, because not putting anybody, you're giving them free ball, basically. They gave Scotland free ball at the line-out.
I don't think we can not discuss the breakdown without mentioning Jamie Ritchie and how he played.
Super.
He was just absolutely sensational. Charlie, why was he so good? His basic question is why did he have so much licence there and do so well?
He's super crafty.
What did Gregor say afterwards? His best ever game for Scotland, I think.
Yeah, and he was right. It was certainly up there.
Gregor Townsend also said that Scotland have played a lot worse than this and beaten England, which I thought was pretty informative. But no, Ritchie was outstanding. Also, really, really good on on the chase in the air on box kicks. So
Yeah.
which is handy if your back rows
They
can do
did
that,
actually mention that on Friday or Thursday about how good he is kind of aerially
Right.
competing and chasing, and I forgot about it until
Yeah.
you just mentioned it, because it's
well,
a
he was
good point.
because if a back row's doing that, it means your wings are on their feet for any transition stuff you get. But Richie, you just got to stay, and you can tell that almost straight away. We're so lucky with the sort of vantage point we get on the game, because you can see the sort of tackles like developing in slow motion, can't you? And it's what I think the first jackal turnover he gets is on Willis, who's done his kind of trademark thing of wriggling out of one tackle, and he wriggles sort of away from Darge and into Richie, and Richie is sort of there. There's another one where
Also wriggled away from his support.
yes, wriggled away from sport as well, but into Richie. And then there's another one he gets later on where England clear past the ball, and he's just in to beat Mitchell to it. He's dancing on that offside line, and he's
Again, suspicious legality on that one.
Yeah,
I found.
yeah,
but you take your chance.
But
so
within
play
10 minutes
together,
of 15 minutes of any test match, you should be going, well, that's the rest.
This is-
That's the way it's going to be for the rest of the game. And it's,
Wild West.
It's and it's on the rest. So, well, England got a couple of reasonably questionable ones themselves. Ben Coe is in the first half. He's on his hands and then goes back onto the ball. Ben White raging again. I love Ben White.
He's great.
tenacity
I
and his
like him a lot.
competitiveness is just fantastic. And then Marrows, obviously, that they really didn't like when there's two clearers that sort of upend Itoje, and he's
still
body weight
in the
is
shape.
on the ball.
Yeah, he's still in the shape of a jackal, isn't he? It's just that he's
Just diving off the top
like
ball.
turtled.
He's not supporting his own body weight because
No.
tacklers have
Lifted
taken
his
him
legs
off
up.
their feet.
Yeah.
So, there's
On the
that.
subject of interesting, we need to tick off a few talking points, basically, and you've segued perfectly into that. So the first one is the Tommy Freeman try. Now, live, I think we just all assumed that it was most likely a try because Pierre Brousset, who was making his Six Nations debut as referee, was right there and he had a good view and he gave it within seconds. And we normally support referees making quick
There's a layer
decisions.
to that. It looked like one of those carries where he is going to be held up because
Yeah.
But then it
tacklers
goes
make-
again. There's another little movement. So he gets over the line and you think, held up. And then there's another little movement where the video evidence would suggest he did not get the ball down. However, you also couldn't say on the video that the tip of that ball did not touch the ground at any point on those angles. I don't think we ever saw the full footage from ITV, did we? But
No.
either way,
That's
is
another
there.
talking point, to
That
be
is
fair.
another talking
Might be
point.
one for another day.
He is right there, and if he thinks that he saw the tip of the ball brush the grass, then he will give it 90.
Someone on Twitter, I think was it Brett, rugby analyst Brett, who we follow and know well. He did actually put out an angle that wasn't shown on the broadcast, but he since deleted the tweet, which either suggests to me conspiracy or maybe he's changed his mind.
Oh, really?
So that was one.
Freeman wasn't exactly.
Well, no,
full of
this
confidence
is the
afterwards.
funniest thing. So afterwards, in the next zone downstairs, after the press conference or during the press conference, he was asked about the try, and he just replied with a bit of a sheepish grin. The referee awarded it, so I grounded it, which isn't the most compelling kind of evidence that he did score. But then what else is he going to say?
What we should add as well in terms of the sort of officiating process and the TMO is that the TMO did come in and say, I have no evidence to overturn your on-field decision. They didn't officially review it, but the TMO did come in because they check everything, and he said there's nothing to overturn. Because the evidence, because he's given try on field, and the evidence, even if they did an official review, there would have to have been conclusive proof that the ball did not touch the grass.
I agree with the facts. Is it one of those? It's not quite not quite a Marius Jonker.
Yeah,
I
not
agree with the
quite.
facts. Is it? It's my favourite. My favourite TMO line. Next incident I want to talk about is Gregor Townsend afterwards in the press conference was quite punchy about a penalty against Rory Darge and Tom Jordan for clearing out Ben Curry, lifting him up, kind of dropping him to the ground, essentially, for want of a better way to express it. So I've got to be honest. I've watched this back multiple times and wrote a piece on it after the final whistle about the two kind of key moments, including that Freeman try. I still think it is a penalty, and I'm not swayed otherwise because of the way that Curry is kind of dropped to the ground. But Gregor Townsend was very strong on it. Do you have an opinion?
Yeah, it's a really, really bizarre line of inquiry for Scotland to take, because regardless of whether that is a penalty or not, and I think there's certainly a case for it, it's certainly a 50-50, because they've lifted a man up at the ruck. Rory Darge has entered the ruck virtually from the English side of the ruck, so it is the most stonewall side entry that you will ever see. So if it's not a penalty for lifting the man up, then it's a penalty for side entry.
The drop's done.
The drop is done. There is no need to do it.
Is that just just frustration? From
Maybe
Darge,
it is a soft penalty for the reasons that he gave, but the fact of the matter is that England 100% should have had a penalty at that ruck for a number of Scottish offences. And so the fact that Townsend brought it up afterwards, given the entry point of Rory Darge at that ruck, is frankly a little bit suspect, I would say.
It's always an interesting moment in press conferences because we're like, any kind of refereeing decisions that you're not happy
well,
about?
I think there were
normally they just gloss over it, don't they? But actually, to bring up that one out of all of them, I was like, oh.
Well,
okay.
I think Gregor almost went the wrong way in the press conference. He said that the referee was really good. And had a really good game, except for this one moment. And I was standing there going, really, I think it's the opposite. I think he's nailed that moment. It's a definite stonewall penalty, and I think he was budget for the rest of the game.
Budget. Fantastic. And final moment of controversy is this the conversion for Duan van der Merwe's try, where
don't understand why that's
Pierre
not closer.
Brisset was asked to. Pierre Brisset asked Finn Russell to move about 2 metres to the left when the try was clearly scored kind of in line with whatever marker it was on the field.
Again, though, we're not privy to the sort of back of house machinations here. Has the TMO come in and told him? And if not, why not? Because that should not be, for such a crucial moment in the game where such precision is required, that should not be down to the referee to know exactly in his memory where the ball was grounded. But what I'm saying is was it if he has just off his own back gone 2 metres and the TMO hasn't corrected him, then that is an error and he shouldn't be doing that. But at the same time, just generally, that is the sort of thing that the TMO absolutely should be coming in for, because he's got access to the replays and he can say, a bit like at the World Snooker Championship when there's been a foul and they respot the ball and they go to the referee on the TV screen to compare. When that precision is required, obviously the technology is vital, and so that's where the TMO should be coming in and going, no, it's 2 metres in.
Might be underselling Maro Tojo's role in that, because I'm just watching it now and it's quite weird because Tojo's sort of walking towards the referee and Russell as if to say it should be wider when it shouldn't be.
And
Duhan's like kind of trying to shepherd Itoje away slightly, but Russell still has to move and then he misses the kick left.
I actually think Itoje was approaching because of a forward pass.
He was.
Yeah, I think it was because of the pass to Stafford McDowell, wasn't it, for the break, which was marginal. Yeah, which we'll say was flat.
Which was delightful.
Yeah. Oh, great line.
Come on.
Great line, but I think it was... I'm happy that it wasn't given as a forward pass, but I think we have seen them given, let's say. Oh, and a little nod for Ollie Chesham as well for getting back and making for your lock in the 78th minute to get back and make the try saver on Stafford McDowell.
And emptying himself so much that Ted Hill got... Ted Hill
was busy for that like
Six Nations debut, 8 seconds before the end.
And Charles, very finally, I don't want to leave this section without talking about England's discipline, because you had a new story on Sunday about how they've sort of been working on that discipline, and they won the penalty count this week. They won the penalty count against France. So what is the secret?
And they have I believe the second best penalty count of all the teams in the Six Nations so far, better than Ireland, and they've been having Premiership and Test referee Christoph Ridley going in and helping them out with their discipline, which isn't, referees going into camp is not new. Jaco Piper is with South Africa full time, Jerome Garces is with France full time. And the Premiership and international referees have always been going into the England camp on rotation. The difference is now that they've sort of got a bit of consistency with it, and Christoph is going in and working really hard with England at their discipline. And as we wrote in the piece that you can see on the website, it's about almost the penalties that they didn't give away that Christoph is advising on, i.e. the 50-50 calls where they were on the right side of the referee and they were trying to eliminate those, i.e. remove judgment from the referee, be legal, be black, make it black and white, be legal, don't be, if you're a millimetre onside, why not be an inch, basically. Stop the referee from having to make a judgment, because then, as we saw with Pierre Brisset and a couple of times on Saturday, and every referee for that matter, can become a bit of a 50-50.
I think two really discernible things you can pick up from England is that thing about the offside line. I think it's Ben Earl I saw that almost give himself so much, knowing that he'll make up the room when he comes off the line. And the other thing is their jackalers sort of peeling back off the ball to sort of it's the Curry. I've got in my head the Currys are doing a lot of disrupting, aren't they? But they're sort of very pronounced. My hands are off the ball, sir, sort of vibe.
Just to sum up how confusing England are at the moment, you've got one column from Will Greenwood saying England play no rugby, and you've got another from Brian Moore saying that England are better off winning lucky than playing good rugby and losing. So you've got the whole kind of spectrum of views on the website
Both
at the
could
moment.
be true,
and both
at the same time,
and both could be true.
Or everything we've said. After everything we've said, I think you look forward to the Italy game and go, if they have to be assertive and imposing with how they want to play against Italy and be on the front foot throughout. I think that's totally fair. I think we certainly judge them in a more negative way if they don't do that.
I think if it's a nervy Italy win, then with
the Italy winning there.
No, so a nervy England win against Italy, then I think the narrative will be that Wales could win on the final day.
But England will have won 3 out of 4.
They will have done.
And they'll might have a chance at the championship. Anyway, let's get into the rest of the weekend.
Go.compare sponsors the Telegraph Rugby podcast. Go.compare is a proud sponsor of the WRU, offering support across all levels of rugby. We are big believers in the importance of grassroots rugby, and that's why we partnered with Telegraph Media Group to launch the Making a Difference campaign. From volunteers to groundsmen, referees to coaches, we wanted to celebrate the people who are really making a difference and reward them with £5,000 for their club to improve the grassroots game. Go to telegraph.co.uk/making a difference to find out more about the grassroots heroes who won our prize pot this year. Go.compare. Feel the deal.
Just like rugby, running a business takes grit, hard work, and a great team behind you. That's where Funding Circle comes in. As sponsors of Premiership Rugby, they're backing businesses like yours with access to fast, hassle-free finance to help you thrive. From coffee shops to kit manufacturers, they backed over 100,000 businesses with more than £13 billion since 2010. To find out how Funding Circle can help get your business goals over the line, visit fundingcircle.com/rugby.
Right, let's start in Cardiff. A much, much better performance from Wales. I think we all hoped that they might have a bit of a new manager bounce, didn't we? And Matt Sherratt, to be fair, has come in, probably had about 4 training sessions, and Wales, I think it's safe to say, Charlie, they looked transformed, didn't they? It looked as though, obviously some personnel changes at fly half and centre, and on the wing, but they did look a bit transformed and like a weight had sort of come off their shoulders a bit.
They just look far closer to the sum of their parts than they have been doing, and that's a sign of coaching. That's a sign of a coach coming in and, to be fair, saying something that we touched on before the tournament was that Warren Gatland could have picked more familiar combinations, and notwithstanding the fact that those combinations had a tricky autumn and been part of significant losses in the autumn, that they could come good sort of with more time with Wales, if that makes sense, because sometimes just leaning on cohesion and continuing to lean on cohesion can get you improved performances, and that's what we saw. There was just a sharpness and a conviction to how they played with the ball. It also really reinforced the importance of the scrum. Nicky Smith and Will Griff-John, awesome games, both of them.
I mean, the bookmakers would never have offered odds on this, but what odds before the match of Will Griff-John winning 3 scrum penalties, or even 4 scrum penalties
it might have been 4
against Andrew Porter? Yeah. Sale's third choice tight head.
What I will say is when referees take a take a dislike to Andrew Porter's angles, they go hard, don't they? Thinking of Wayne Barnes in the World Cup quarter-final against New Zealand as a big example.
They do, but I don't even think they were these weren't technical pens though. It wasn't, this was completely deserved. Yeah, this was Will Griff-John doing a number on him, I think.
Tears for my
I mean, yes, okay, the angle doesn't help, but it makes it much easier for, I think it was Christoph who was refereeing, wasn't it? It makes it much easier for them and the AR. But, I mean, these were, they were stonewall. They weren't up for debate.
I think it was the attack as well, Charlie, because they actually had, as harsh as it sounds, they actually had a clear shape to the attack and what they were trying to approach. And I appreciate the Rome Italy game was so wet that it was quite hard to put kind of cohesive attacks together. But they just looked far better in terms of actual patterns, and they'd clearly worked hard on runners at the back and dummy runners actually fixing up defenders, and they played to width, and that was partly why Ellis Mee had such a great
I was going to say,
debut
what a start
on the wing.
What a start.
Really impressive. It's so like a fingertip or two away from having that try in the corner, wasn't he? And I know that frustrated a lot of Welsh supporters.
And that offload to Llewellyn, I think it was Llewellyn in the second half. Lovely, like off the shoulder offload after he's made the line break out the tackle, or sort of semi line break out the tackle. And I think Llewellyn put it down, and I think he was under the sticks, and I think he should have taken it, and that would have been a key moment in the match, and you could have been looking at a different result.
You probably heard this over the weekend, listeners, but Ellis Mee's just a great story because he was at Nottingham last season, wasn't he? Scored about 7 tries, signed by the Scarlets. Has only played, I think it's about 8 or 9 games for the Scarlets this season. Handed a debut, and at 6'4" on the wing, he's clearly got good pace, good kind of power, good aerial ability. That was positive. Performances of Max Llewellyn was positive. Gareth Anscombe and Jared Evans came back in, and particularly when Jared Evans was at 10 as well, and they shuffled things around, I thought they looked really, really sharp. I mean, they still lost, but so much progress from the previous weeks, wasn't there?
We were watching it together, weren't we? We were watching it.
Watched it with the masses, which was quite.
Oh yeah,
nice.
we went outside to the masses,
for the second half.
So sort of got the vibe that everybody was sort of rallying behind Wales.
Yes, you'll never hear a bigger Twickenham cheer for Wales.
Not a vibe, it was explicit, weren't they? They were cheering Wales tries and shouting, "Come on, Wales!" The Twickenham faithful.
But one thing we kind of thought was from about 50, it felt like a long half hour left.
Yeah, we all turned to each other and said, "There's too much time."
And part of that is the 20-minute red card allowing a fresh Bundy Aki to come on and sort of re-energise Ireland, which was handy.
Oh no, we've had a red card, so we've got to bring on someone who is arguably better.
I'd actually put that in my top 5 Bundy Irish performances, because he came on and was just an absolute menace carrying, menace at the breakdown, was bleeding from basically the first 30 seconds, I think, which meant that he turned what somebody described to me as a terrible Ireland shirt into quite a good looking shirt, given it was covered in like blood. And like black Guinness paint from the middle of the
I would agree with
field.
that, because that Irish strip is minging.
But a nice principle.
Yeah.
For colourblind viewers, and not having that kind of clash. I thought.
Oh no, I don't mind. I don't mind them changing into a white shirt. It was more the art that they've decided to adorn it with, which I think was mean. I don't mind them wearing white.
Charlie, I've run out of platitudes for Gibson Park. So can you help me just sum up how influential and impressive he continues to be in this Irish side? He's just remarkable, isn't he?
Yeah, he's excellent. The range of his passing, the speed of his passing, the work he does sort of cycling back round into the defensive line, sort of, I'd love to see the sort of how far these guys travel in games and how that stacks up position by position, because those players that cycle back around and keep width in the defensive line are just so valuable. But yeah, he's a hugely important player for them, and you can tell by how long he's sort of staying on in games. Yeah, just excellent.
What would need to happen for him to not start the first test for the Lions?
Well, I think as other
missed the flight.
Yeah, other than being injured, obviously.
Other
than being
I think
injured.
as other candidates are, is that the one position where there is a standout player so far above the rest?
I think
it
so.
is.
Because
I think maybe had Tuipulotu been fit, you might have said that at 12 as well, but he's not, and so it's, it's
what
up for grabs.
about Bundy
King
Aki?
Bundy?
Well, yeah, but they could play him at 13, couldn't they, if they wanted to?
Bundy and Tuipulotu. Wow, that would be a menace. This is quite an interesting game, isn't it? Because it sets up their next games really, really well. Because Scotland-Wales now has a completely different look about it. Because you wonder if Wales can take that build on it, but actually Scotland, you might get a performance like France against Italy where they're going to be furious and just like unleash hell, for want of a better word. Sorry, Charlie.
Yeah, no, I was going to say just on
Dan Sheehan as well.
Dan Sheehan as well. Sam Prendergast as well. We spoke, didn't we, about how Ireland are bedding players in to a really solid base because everything else about the squad is going really well, and there's so much sort of clarity about how they're playing and intuition about how they're playing. I think this game in a microcosm was a great example of that, because he had tricky moments.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Kept him on. And he showed us that 50-20.
I think it's one of the best I've ever seen, genuinely.
Unbelievable.
I think
And that came not long after, you're right. He could have easily been hooked after a few.
Because it's a spiral as well, which doesn't necessarily mean anything, but it just looks cool.
Yeah.
And he's got to land it. He's got to land it in a 5 square metre patch. Well, less.
It looks cool,
2
but
square
you
metre
can't
patch.
get the trajectory on the ball with a sort of a safer end over end, can you?
No.
You can't get the dip, and it's
need the
Jared
dip
Evans,
and the
I
speed.
think. That's Jared Evans, I think, that he basically lobs in the backfield with that strike, and it's only possible if he hits it like that.
Yeah.
And that just opens up so many. If you can effectively get 60 metres like that and then have the ball back, it's remarkable. And he's developing in such an ominous way. And one of our colleagues, Gab Mayers, actually made the point after the game when we were talking about Lions fly halves. If he's the starting fly half in an Ireland Grand Slam, he's the Lions
becomes hard to
fly half,
ignore,
isn't
doesn't
it?
it?
It's definitely hard to ignore.
Why would you break it up? That's a good point. And it sets up Ireland 3 wins now, and the France game is next. And obviously we'll get deep into it next time. But let's talk about how France played on Sunday. I mean, just an absolute demolition.
It was, wasn't it? Well, certainly the second half.
And they came out at such a ferocious tempo as well in the first few minutes, and they could have had 2 tries in the first 5 minutes. They looked like they were playing angry, for want of a better word.
Yeah, but then in those first sort of 5 or 10 minutes, I was a little bit concerned for them because Italy, they spurned a couple of opportunities. It looked like Italy's goal line defence was excellent. Well, it didn't look like it was excellent, and they were frustrating France certainly in the first sort of 5 or 10 minutes. And you thought, oh, I mean, Italy at home, they'll get confidence off this. This will nourish them. The fact that they're holding France out early on.
The defence for the Menoncello try was awful from France as well.
Yeah, and the fact that Italy took the lead, and you thought, okay, so France have just spurned 2 opportunities, and now Menoncello's just scored and Italy are leading at home, and you know that when they're at home, Italy, they are a slightly different proposition. When that crowd gets behind them, they're obviously very passionate people. But then in the end, yeah, it was just... You don't like saying it in the Six Nations, but it was virtually men against boys, wasn't it? Certainly in that second half.
No, you're right. The quality of the Italian tackling and defence was so bad, and there's no other way to dress up. It was so bad that basically any time France got 2-on-1 or 3-on-2 in that wide channel, you just assumed that there was going to be a try one way or the other. I don't want to diminish, though, from how well France did a lot of things, because it's easy to just say that Italy were terrible, but actually France's movement with the ball was fantastic. The back three of Barry and Bielbiari and Atisogbe were all great. I think the way they use Bielbiari as like a sweeping player around the back is so good. He had this ridiculous little grubber kick, which must be
1 metre.
Yeah, I'd like to know the kind of like sage official stats for like how short a grubber kick it was. It might have only rolled like once, and then he instantly picked it up to set up Barry for that second try.
But without doing that, they weren't scoring.
No,
and it was the presence of mind and the vision
essential
to know that he's
and
inside and
brilliantly
bang.
executed.
And that lovely one-handed offload as well, which obviously has gone viral on Twitter.
Yeah, that was amazing. It's quite hard to pick a favourite try. I mean, maybe I loved the way Dupont basically just stopped and waited for Barry to run onto his pass at the end of the first half before he crashed over. That was really nice.
Great line.
I just thought that they looked menacing and they looked pissed off. To be honest, the way Twickenham had gone and they came out and played that way.
Yeah, I know, quite right. I'm not necessarily convinced that it tells us much that we didn't already know about the magnitude of Ireland v France. The only thing that it would have told us is had Italy won or France been dire, then I think we would have probably said Ireland now comfortable favourites for that game, whereas I still think now, really, in Dublin, it's a massive, massive game, the biggest game of the Championship. It looked like the biggest game of the Championship before the Championship started. Nothing's changed on that front except for France have lost. It's not a Grand Slam decider because France lost at Twickenham. It's still going to be massive. It's still probably going to be an excellent match, and the winner will probably win the title, although not. England might have something to say about that. England might have something to say about that.
Pano coming back, do you think?
Well, he didn't do much for Bordeaux last night. I think he scored a try, but was quite quiet.
How did Jalabert play?
I didn't see it all. I've only seen the highlights. Looked fine. Pano didn't do too much. I mean, Jalabert was also ill during the week. It's all been a little bit confusing, or I don't know if France have just been saying that. Team Galtier have just been saying that to make it appear like he's not been dropped. I don't really know, because we're not in France. But will Peno come back? That is a massive question, because it wasn't like he went back to his club last night and put in a massive statement. And Atisogbe looked good and has been part of a record French victory. So it would be pretty harsh to drop him.
Yeah, I wanted to flag that it's the most points France have ever scored in the Six Nations. It's the second most points ever scored by a team in the Six Nations. After that, England 80-pointer against Italy from 0-1. Charlie's to finish off on this. I came away bizarrely having just mentioned how bad the defence was, leaking 11 tries. Not actually that worried about Italy because I just felt France were just in a steamroller kind of mode, and actually, I think most sides would have struggled in that game. Whereas are you more worried?
I think that's doing more
Maybe I'm
credit
being
than Italy
kind.
deserve for that. I think some of that was really passive and quite poor, especially at home, to fade away that badly after playing some good stuff and being in it.
It just,
You mentioned the no look pass. That they've got the tools to really trouble sides, so they should really be able to stick with sides and allow that to sort of trouble them more. But they just faded away. It just felt really sort of passive.
It was a bit like they gave up, which they just didn't do at Murrayfield, and they didn't do against Wales. They were so kind of cohesive and committed throughout that maybe that's why I think it's a bit.
Maybe we're not seeing this. This is the next stage for this Italy side, is to back up those results, right? And I know they had a pretty decent campaign last year with a couple of wins, right? And but back just targeting one game and almost they've won against Wales. So it felt like there was a little bit of a sense of, right, the tournaments are kind of at least a success now, and we'll get a crack
hit your benchmark
crack
sort
at
of
England,
thing,
yeah. And then that just all fell away. Having said that, like the look of Guillard as well.
The French long,
he looks very talented.
Presumably, Meafu will come back in for Ireland with Flamont, who obviously returned.
Yeah.
But they will probably go Guillard on the bench. It'll be interesting to see if they go 7-1.
I was going to say, will they go 7-1 again?
I mean, are they going to go to Dublin without Damien Penaud in the squad at all, without him being in the 23?
I don't reckon they go 7-1. I don't think as amazing as he quite clearly is, Dupont's not a 10.
Absolutely not.
I don't think he would even want to cover there in a test match.
You wouldn't want him there in a kind of nailed on.
But they could quite easily start Ramos in Dublin and have Jalibert on the bench. But I don't know if they would. I don't know if he'd see that as a waste.
As the
Untamak will come back. But Untamak will be back.
But that would be 6-2
rather
than 7-1.
Yeah, but Untamak is now available for Dublin. So he will probably come back and start at 10.
He would come back
and then they will have Ramos at 15, presumably. So actually, Jalibert maybe not in the squad at all, and maybe they will have Ramos as a backup 10 and then Dupont as a third backup 10.
Yeah.
We'll have two scrum halves on the bench, Luca and Lagarek.
Okay, on to your questions. Thank you for sending them in on Sunday night. We're going to start with one from Stephen, who says, England played significantly better in the series of close losses against the Southern Hemisphere teams than in their misleading and anomalous wins against Scotland and especially France. Discuss. Charlie.
I'm glad that's not a question and doesn't necessarily mean Stephen agrees with it, because maybe he does. But I don't think the last two wins have been particularly misleading or anomalous, because I think that bits of their game have been very good. Certainly, the back end of the game against France came on strong, found a bit of structure in attack, had a bit of bench impact. Against Scotland, their set piece was excellent. We haven't spoken about the fact that they made the concession to the line out with dropping Martin, and that didn't affect the scrum. That's really impressive. And even with a pretty lightweight back row as well as a fairly lightweight set of locks, their scrum carried on being absolutely fine. So I just think that they have certainly got a bit of luck in these last two games, but also we can't forget that when they were getting quite fairly unlucky in those close losses, bits of their game were also falling down, and they were having sort of lapses of accuracy as well as kind of luck not going their way. So I do think they are progressing, and it really isn't that bad a thing to be able to dog out a win against a side that has beaten you 4 times in a row and you've only beaten once since 2017. I think people painting that as a step backwards, I think that's a bit far-fetched for me.
I agree, but I think if you look at I agree that I don't think the last 2 victories have been misleading and anomalous, but I do think it just, off the top of my head now, the tries that they scored against Ireland at home last year, France away last year, and on the New Zealand tour, the quality of those tries has not been matched since, I don't think. And if they have, it's been occasionally, and it's not been a pattern. And I don't think they've matched that in terms of ball play ball movement and identification of space and ambition. Certainly not in this Six Nations. I don't think they did it very often, certainly not often enough last autumn.
No, that's fair.
It kind of ties into a question from who was it? Oh, from Mike about the back three, who says, what's the logic behind having Smith and Slightholme in your back three if you're playing this kind of contestable kick battle strategy? I guess what he's saying is, why don't they have like taller players in the back three to compete in the air?
I wouldn't say necessarily that England adopted that contestable kick battle. I think they waited to see what Scotland did, and Scotland sort of engaged in that contestable kicking battle, and then England sort of got drawn into it. I think when they actually stay, it's funny, isn't it? We always sort of hear that they want one aerially excellent wing and one sort of running wing, but they ended up kicking for the running wing in Slightholme to chase in the first half. And when that flipped around, and when they went more off 10, I think Daniel Schofield's written a piece about it. They flipped that strategy a bit, and they went more off 10 as well as off 9 towards Freeman's wing, and that's when they were really getting a lot of pay. A couple of chances there that I mentioned earlier on come from that contestable kicking. With Smith at 15, clearly you're a little bit more hampered in a contestable kicking battle, but you've picked Smith for if Scotland kick long, which they have done a lot of times at Twickenham, and that's basically been their ticket to winning.
That was the bait and switch, wasn't it? Because actually they didn't do that as much.
Yeah, they didn't do it as much, but there's one point. I know Scotland played a lot. They'd moved the ball a lot better through their hands, but there's one where they win back a box kick from Ben White in the first half. It goes straight to Finn Russell, who just booms it downfield, and that's been their template to beat England, is pinning them back. And the thing about kicking is, geez, going back to this kicking thing, you get amnesia when people play off it well. England just weren't playing off it well, and that was handling errors, that was breakdown sort of lapses, not necessarily within the kicking battle themselves.
Charles, you received a question about how does Scotland essentially get an apology is the question, but how do they speak to people? How does the process work in terms of getting feedback about the conversion and the Freeman try, and that whole process? How does that play out?
So yeah, Pierre Brousset is not going to be hung out to dry publicly by World Rugby. What I would say is that the second part of the question, which sort of asks whether there should be some kind of public accountability, not just from the weekend, but just generally, should rugby introduce this, i.e. referees explaining their decisions? I think, given how important they've become in the sport, I think there is some logic behind that, but I just think you get down into this horrible pit, then this minefield of they're coming out and publicly. I had the thought a few months ago that they maybe should join the post-match press conference, and
some refs would be up for it.
Yeah, I think some refs would be up for it. To not with the coaches, I should stress, they should do their own little bit where the journalists who are there, not the public, where the journalists who are there can actually ask them about certain decisions. But then I think they haven't seen the footage back at this point, so they couldn't. All the refs the day after refereeing will review their own match on TV, where they can say, oh yeah, maybe I was a bit harsh there, this and the other. Straight after the game, they wouldn't know.
In the NFL, you get a kind of a lead official from each game doing a little kind of pool report with all of the journalists sort of discussing key decisions. I don't know if it would work in rugby. It's an interesting idea.
I think if that happened, journalists collectively would be pretty blown away.
What would we write about?
Yeah, true.
You would lose a lot of the controversy.
It's the old Arsene Wenger. Was it Arsene Wenger who say you haven't seen it yet when he was asked in the post-match press?
Yeah.
It would be the same, but genuinely the same for referees. If they had to go and explain their decisions, they'd be like, "Well, this is what I saw live, but you've seen what I saw live because you saw it as well, and so that's what I saw live, but I haven't had a chance to analyse it yet."
Yeah. Andrew wants to know, why do England A consistently play better rugby and win than the senior team? Charlie, what do you think of that? You've gone through the highlights. I watched a bit of it yesterday.
Two things probably that they've got shorter prep time. In Lee Blackett, certainly this England A side, he was head coach for this game, wasn't he? But he was just attack coach with Mark Mapletoft, head coach of the A game against Australia in November. But those Mapletoft and Blackett are two attack-minded former backs who are coaching. Blackett obviously being head coach. Think of his teams, that he's been in charge of or been prominent in over the last few years. They're very attack-minded. I think there's also something in maybe just stripping it back, and just you often are just picking a very balanced backline. There's also the one big purpose of these England A games is to blood players and give players an opportunity in games where there is less pressure fundamentally.
I was going to say, way less pressure.
That's an absolute aim of the fixtures.
Yeah.
So there is less pressure. They are playing an Ireland A side who were, without sort of denigrating England A's performance, were butchered by injuries at the start of a game. And although it was wet, they did play with a lot of intent, England A, and there was a lovely inside ball from George Kloska to Ollie Hassel-Collins, which was worth looking at. Just really sort of clever little two-phase strike play.
And a great solo try from Jack Van Portfleet, who was captain.
Yes.
Will he be on the bench for Italy?
He'd be better suited to the sort of game that kind of played out than Harry Randall would. For instance, I thought when Harry Randall came on around the hour mark, I thought this is potentially the most significant. He has had a few starts, Harry Randall, but this is one of the most significant sort of little cameos that he's going to have, and whether he'll be able to. It's just not. Got charged down, didn't he, in one sort of, he undercut one as he did in Ireland. This box kicks these are. I just thought they could have kicked off 10 and even wider to help him out a little bit more. But yeah, so yeah, to answer your question, I think Van Portfleet is very much back in the mix. But yeah, there's loads of things going into that. England A consistently playing better rugby and winning, not least their opposition. However, it is really impressive and encouraging to see them play the way they do.
And also, the Premiership is a really good league, and it's got 10 teams. Ireland, I know they are fantastic domestically, and they're clearly fantastic at international, but they're only picking from 4 clubs, whereas England are picking from 10. So therefore, you would say, by definition, the second tier, that they've just got a bigger player pool, so they should be good.
Yeah.
Final question from Harlequin 1974. I can't think why he's asking this question. When do we admit that the issue at scrum half is far worse than the non-issue at fly half? In what is
just touched on it, haven't we? I mean, I don't think there's an issue with the starting. I don't think there's an issue with the starting now, and I don't think that Mitchell had his best day at the office on Saturday. But
is that because he's kind of because he's playing within the system a bit, and he's not quite playing the game we're used
maybe,
to
but I do quite like the sort of the Saints cohesion and fluidity that they've got. I mean, I think there really is an argument for Dingwall coming in for Slade on the same grounds. I think Mitchell is the incumbent, and I don't think he's under pressure here. I think in terms of their replacement scrum half, yes, there is a little bit, because clearly they, for whatever reason, they don't trust Ben Spencer.
Poignant moment with Ben Spencer giving Finn Russell a little hug at
yes,
that was quite sweet.
Yeah. And Harry Randall didn't come on against France at all. He was unused, and then didn't necessarily impress against Scotland in what we have discussed was a difficult day for scrum halves. But I think there is a little bit of a depth issue. I do think that Mitchell and JVP are England's best pair, but I think that JVP is also... They both are actually quite injury prone, for that matter, so therefore that's the issue. Who is beneath them? And there isn't a ton of established talent in the Premiership at the minute, but there are people coming through.
Surely Van Portfleet, with his history with Borthwick, gets back in there at some point. I'm just not sure when.
Definitely, he's been injured. That's why he wasn't dropped to the A's. He was injured, and then I think what they've done is go and captain the A's, prove your fitness, prove your form, and then we'll see as to what happens against Italy. But I would be staggered if he wasn't recalled.
People forget about his running threat.
Yeah,
He's
really
great
do.
at that.
Yeah,
really do.
Really good.
And
he's really strong.
remember when he came on the scene in Australia, and it was like a breath of fresh air. What the conviction that he added to England in 2022, and at his best, when he is being really decisive, he's an excellent player.
Right, that's all for today. Thank you, Charlie. Thank you, Charles. There's no Six Nations this weekend, but a quick nod to what is happening. Charlie, what's going on in the Premiership Rugby Cup?
The Premiership Rugby Cup quarter-final lineup is as follows: Newcastle hosting Gloucester, Bath hosting Harlequins, Exeter hosting Stale, and Northampton hosting Ealing Trailfinders. There's also Premiership Women's Rugby, PWR semi-finals, Saracens hosting Harlequins and Gloucester Hartpury hosting Bristol Bears, which be
that's going to be quite
really
spicy,
good
isn't
stuff.
it? Based on recent history and recent rivalries. I quite look forward to that. Thanks as ever, listeners, for your questions and for tuning in. There's loads of Six Nations content on the Telegraph website as we review the weekend that's gone and build up to next week. If you missed our exclusive interview with Warren Gatland as well, that is up on the YouTube channel, just talking about his exit from Wales, which was done very well by Gavin Mayers. There's also our Lions selector tool for you to have a go at picking your squad. I'm sure we'll talk about that in the next couple of weeks. But until next week, when we preview round 4 of the Six Nations, we'll speak to you then. Goodbye.
Go.compare sponsors the Telegraph Rugby podcast. Every rugby player knows they need the support of their team to get the best results, and it's the same with insurance. When you are looking for great deals on your insurance, you can find the perfect support in Go.compare, helping compare the right deals for you. Feel the deal with Go.compare.